Well, as much as I have thoroughly enjoyed looking at other scriptures for this last 4 weeks of this Advent season, I have to tell you, I am equally excited to jump back into Genesis. I love this book, and I pray that you guys are finding it enjoyable and profitable. There's a lot here, and it's just truly a wonderful book. But seeing as how we've been away for a while here, I think the best introduction to today's message is to just give us a little bit of a reminder or a recap of what's been going on in the storyline up to this point. So way back now, Abraham had received the promises of God, what we call the Abrahamic covenant. Abraham, if you remember, he was called out of his pagan homeland to go to this land that God would show him and this land that God promised to give him. And once he was in that land, God then gave him other promises. He promised him offspring that were innumerable, as many as the sands of the seashore. And he also promised Abraham that he, or through him, he would be a blessing to the nations of the earth. So though Abraham was promised innumerable offspring, he was more specifically promised an offspring, a son, a covenant son who would come from Sarah. And if you remember, after a long time and many ups and downs and many starts and stops, Sarah gave birth to this covenant son. His name was Isaac. And this son, Isaac, he received the same promises that were given to his father, Abraham. And so this Abrahamic covenant will now work its way through Isaac. And fast forward a little bit, and Isaac, he has twins by his wife, Rebekah. Esau was the firstborn, and then Jacob is the secondborn, the younger, and he comes out holding on to Esau's heel. And we're told very early on that the nations that would proceed from these two brothers, that they would be at war with one another. And we were also told there that contrary to cultural expectations, that the older would serve the younger. And that was just backwards. And then as the twins grow, there's this incident where the younger twin, Jacob, he takes advantage of his older brother Esau's impatience and hunger by convincing him to sell him the birthright for a bowl of stew. And if you remember Esau, what he does is he despises the grace of this birthright because he's very quick to just give it away. To just give it away in order to satisfy his own fleshly appetite. The birthright, it was that thing that would give a son the place of privilege and authority within the family. But it also give him a double inheritance. And now that birthright belongs to the younger, Jacob, completely backwards. But as God said, the older would serve the younger. Well, after this, we read that the father, Isaac, he had it in his mind to bless his favorite son, Esau, and not bless his younger son, Jacob. Well, their mom, Rebekah, she overhears this, and she favors Jacob. And so she hatches a plan whereby they are going to deceive or trick her husband, Jacob, who is blind at this point, to trick him into giving Jacob the blessing instead of Esau. And this is what happens. Jacob dresses up as his brother, and he goes into his blind father and says and lies and says, "I'm Esau." And Isaac unwittingly gives the blessing to Jacob. So at this point, Jacob, the younger son, has both the birthright and the blessing. The older would serve the younger, just as God had said. Well, Esau, he's furious now at his conniving brother, and he is intent on killing him. And Mother Rebekah, she gets wind of this, and she knows now Esau's plans, that he is intent on murder, so she convinces her husband to send Jacob away to her brother's house in Haran, her brother Laban. So it's in this way that Rebekah can kind of kill two birds with one stone, right? She gets Jacob on the other side of the world, away from Esau to keep him safe, but also as Jacob is with his people, he will be able to find a wife from among his own people, instead of doing what Esau did, which is rebelliously taking the women of the land, the Canaanite women, as his wife. And when we left off, Jacob was on his way to Uncle Laban's house, and at a certain place, alone in the wilderness, Jacob fell asleep. And he had a vision there of a ladder that extended from earth to heaven. And on this ladder, the angels of God were ascending and descending on this ladder. And God spoke to Jacob from atop this ladder, telling him that he would receive the same promises that had been given to his father Isaac. Telling him that he would receive the same promises that had been given to his grandfather Abraham. And so we see now that the Abrahamic covenant is now working its way through Jacob. This whole scene is meant to show us the powerful working and providence of God as he's the one that's in control of the angels. He's the one that accomplishes all that he purposes. Jacob, he recognizes the greatness of God, and so he names that place Bethel, or Bethel, which means house of God. And then Jacob, he leaves Bethel, having encountered God and having received the promises. But as we're going to see in the next few chapters, Jacob has a lot of growing to do. A lot of growing to do. And so this kind of catches us up now to Genesis 29, where our text for today. Jacob is on his way to his uncle's place in Haran. Okay? Now, in our text today, we're going to see that Jacob, the trickster, gets tricked. The deceiver gets deceived. Jacob, he gets a little bit of a taste of his own medicine from his uncle Laban. And this whole thing becomes really one big disaster. However, we will see that in the midst of this family chaos, even in the midst of this chaos, God is lining things up just the way that he would have them in order to fulfill his purposes. That's what he's doing. And so our message today, in a nutshell, is quite simply this. God works in our mess to bring about his purposes. We create a mess, but he's still working. So look with me, if you will, at the first 12 verses, divine appointment. And we're going to see here that nothing is coincidence or happenstance, but everything is God working in the details of our lives. That's what I want us to see here. It says there, then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. As he looked, he saw a well in the field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it. For out of that well, the flocks were watered. The stone on the well's mouth was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob said to them, my brothers, where do you come from? And they said, we are from Haran. He said to them, do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? They said, we know him. He said to them, is it well with him? They said, it is well, and see, Rachel his daughter is coming with the sheep. He said, behold, it is high day. It is not time for the livestock to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go, pasture them. But they said, we cannot until all the flocks are gathered together and the stone is rolled from the mouth of the well. Then we water the sheep. While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. Now as soon as Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob came near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. Jacob, he's on his journey here toward the land of the east, which is basically from where he's coming from, is on the other side of the known world. And he comes to this well in a field where there are 3 different flocks of sheep just laying down, waiting to be watered. And we're told there that the stone that covered this well, it was quite large. And what they would do is the shepherds would wait until everyone had arrived in order to remove the stone. And so it could be that the stone was so heavy that one person really couldn't do it by themselves, and they needed everybody to kind of move the stone. But at minimum, it was so heavy that you wouldn't want to do it more than once. right? And so they would just wait until everybody got there, do it once, and that way they didn't have to struggle with this large stone. Well, it seems that nobody really greets Jacob. They're all kind of just lounging around, waiting for everybody to kind of show up. So Jacob, he makes a little bit of small talk, asking them where they're from. Now, it's likely that before the days of GPS, Jacob probably knew that he was getting close to his destination, but he didn't know exactly where he was, and so he might be trying to get some information about where he's at this point. The shepherds respond that they are from Haran. And this, of course, is where Jacob is going. This is where he's heading. And so he asks them, do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? And they say that they do. And so Jacob inquires of, well, how's it going with him? And they tell him that it is well with him, but also, wouldn't you know it, here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep right now. What a wonderful coincidence that is. And at this point, I think that Jacob, he reveals a bit of his arrogant and prideful character. He questions here, or maybe even more, he kind of rebukes these shepherds, pointing out that it's the middle of the day and their sheep should be out in the pasture. They should be out in the pasture where that good grass is. They shouldn't be here waiting to be watered. It's the middle of the day. He literally tells them, water the sheep and go, pasture them. They respond to his little command here by telling him that they wait until all the flocks have shown up, and then they remove the stone and they water them all together. That's how we do things. I say that this reveals a little bit of Jacob's arrogance and pride because he thinks that he knows what they need to do with their sheep better than they do. Jacob, he comes from a long line of shepherds, and this just isn't the way they do it where he's from. Where he's from, they would be in the pasture of the middle of the day, and they would water either in the morning or in the evening. And so he thinks he needs to tell them how this needs to be done, as if they need his help. Now, of course, Jacob is imposing his own understanding on their situation, but their situation's different. They believe that because the stone that covers the well is so big, that it's just best for all the shepherds to show up with all their flocks and just do it all at one time. I mean, we don't know, right? We don't know. Maybe there was this communal aspect to the watering of the sheep. Maybe it was during this time that the shepherds communicated and gave news of what was going on. Maybe it was a way that they shared in the lives of each other. We don't know. But the point is, Jacob thinks he knows. And Jacob thinks he knows what's best for them. And he's showing some hubris here, suggesting that he knows better than they do. And I think that's just a good reminder for us that people don't always do do things the same way that we do, right? We like to think that they do, but they don't. It can be a little bit presumptuous to try to tell other people how they should be doing what they are doing. I mean, sure, there may be times when you have a more efficient way or a better way, but often we don't know the whole situation or the reasons behind why somebody does something a certain way. Now, there is, of course, we always want to contend for truth. There is that, and then we must contend for that truth. But when it comes to just opinions or the way certain things are done, we're a little bit out of bounds when we try to impose our own way on everybody else. And so I just find Jacob a little bit cocky here. So while Jacob was telling them what they should be doing, Rachel, Laban's daughter, she walks up. And the text says that as soon as Jacob saw her and the sheep, he rolled away the stone and watered Laban's flock. First, notice there that Jacob saw Rachel and the sheep. I think we're told that on purpose. I think we're supposed to see here that not only did Jacob see Rachel, but he saw the sheep. And the sheep would be representative of his uncle's wealth. And he took notice. Jacob took notice that not only did Laban have a beautiful daughter, but he had a pretty nice flock as well. And it could be that he desires both, Rachel and the flock. Remember who Jacob is up to this point. He is an opportunist. He's an opportunist, and so he may be salivating here. Also, as we've said, few times now, the shepherds, they would wait until everybody got there in order to roll away this heavy stone. Many hands make light work, right? But Jacob, he's so overcome with joy and excitement at seeing Rachel and the sheep that all of a sudden he has this sudden burst of adrenaline and he removes the stone all by himself. A feat of strength. And notice another thing. He waters Rachel's sheep who just showed up before these other shepherds who've been waiting all morning. So we see how overwhelmed Jacob is at this meeting because he also kisses Rachel and he wept aloud, telling her that he was the son of her father's sister, Rebekah. And so for her part, Rachel, she goes off running to tell her father Laban the news of who's here. As it comes to this whole scene here, you may have noticed that I sarcastically said, and wouldn't you know it, here comes Rachel with the sheep. Remember, I called that a wonderful coincidence. A little later, I called this scene a chance encounter. And of course, I'm being sarcastic. I'm saying this in jest because there is nothing of chance or coincidence here. This is the sovereign and providential hand of God working in the lives of Jacob and Rachel. That's what this is. While the world calls these types of things luck or coincidence, I like to call them divine appointments. Divine appointments. God has orchestrated everything to happen in just this way at just this time. And I was talking to Deanna actually the other night about these types of moments, and she referred to them as God winks, where God just kind of winks, right? I kind of like that too. The sovereignty of God extends to the details of life. There's no such thing as luck or coincidence. There's only the providence of God. Proverbs 19:21 says, "Many are the plans in the mind of man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand." Man, you and I, we have a lot of desires, we got a lot of plans, but ultimately, it is the purpose of the Lord that will come to fruition. It is God who ordains, who allows, who directs all things in order to bring about his purposes. We've mentioned this before, but I would venture to say that each of us can look back at moments or seasons of our lives and say, yeah, I saw God working there, or I now see God working there in the details of our lives to bring us to a certain place, or to meet a certain person, or to experience a particular event, or all of the above. In actuality, if we had the ability, we would see God orchestrating the many details of our lives. God has purpose for the world. And even more, God has purpose for his people. Ephesians 1, verse 11 says, "In him we have obtained an inheritance, having been predestined according to the purpose of him who works all things according to the counsel of his will." God is a God of purpose who works some things according to his will. No, it says all things according to his will. Now, some people, they either don't understand or they don't like the idea of predestination, that God orchestrated and ordained beforehand that certain things would happen. Some people view that as fatalistic, meaning that it just kind of reduces us to robots or puppets. And I don't have time to get into how and why that's not quite true this morning, but predestination and the providence of God, they are the biblical reality. And for me, there's a great, great comfort in that. As the children of God, we are not just floating along on the waves of chance and luck and whatever it may be, wherever they may take us. No, we have a God who's a God of purpose. God has a purpose, and it is that purpose that will be fulfilled for us and in us. That's a wonderful thing. Romans 8:28 says, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose." In terms of God's providence, especially in the lives of his people. I've heard it compared to a tapestry where what we see is the back, where there's just a whole bunch of random threads that create one big chaotic mess of disarray. But when you flip that over, and it will be flipped over, on the other side we see the beautiful picture or the wonderful design that God has been creating all along through those threads. This meeting between Jacob and Rachel and all that surrounds it, it's not chance. It's not luck. It's not coincidence. It's not happenstance. It is God working according to his purpose in the lives of his people. That's what it is. A divine appointment. So let's move along now to family agreement in verses 13 through 20. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him, embraced him, and kissed him, and brought him to his house. Jacob told Laban all these things, and Laban said to him, "Surely you are my bone and my flesh." And he stayed with him a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel." Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to any other man. Stay with me." So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. So as soon as Uncle Laban hears the news of Jacob being there, he runs to Jacob and enthusiastically greets him, declaring, "You are bone of my flesh. We're family, you and I." He's excited. And as I read about this, or I read this, I couldn't help but be taken back to something we read earlier in Genesis. Remember when Abraham wanted to find a wife for his son Isaac? And so he sent his servant back to his homeland of Haran here, right? And remember, when the servant met Rebekah, he also met her brother Laban. And Laban, just like this, came out and enthusiastically greeted the servant. Why? Because Laban had heard about all the choice gifts that he had brought. Remember? It could be that Laban was so quick to greet him here because he thought maybe he had another cash grab on his hands. Right? We don't know. It says that Jacob had been there a month, and that Laban comes to Jacob saying that, "Hey, it's not right for you to work for me for a whole month. We're family. What do you want your wages to be?" And this seems like such a wonderful and gracious offer from his uncle, right? However, as the storyline continues, we see that Uncle Laban isn't as wonderful as he seems. Not even close. As a matter of fact, later in the story, Jacob says to Rachel, "Yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. Uncle Laban is a cheat as well. Uncle Laban's one of those guys that you ever met them that they're always changing the goalpost, moving the goalpost on you. That's Uncle Laban. Now, before we get to Jacob's answer to this generous offer of wages, we're told that Laban had 2 daughters. The older one, her name was Leah, and she's what is described here as having weak eyes. Weak eyes. People often wonder what that means. What does that mean that Leah had weak eyes? Well, it could be that Leah had a vision problem. She couldn't see that well. It could be that when compared to the eyes of Rachel, that Leah's eyes just weren't as beautiful or striking. It could be that in a culture where everybody's eyes were brown, it could be that Leah had light-colored eyes, maybe even blue eyes, and that might have been seen as a weakness. The truth is we don't really know what that means that she has weak eyes, but the weakness of Leah's eyes is a hindrance to her beauty. The older daughter, Leah, she's kind of homely. She's kind of the ugly duckling. Whereas her younger sister, Rachel, we're told, is beautiful both in form and appearance. And we are specifically told that Jacob loved Rachel. So with Uncle Laban's offer in his mind and his love of Rachel in his heart, Jacob responds to Laban saying that he will work for him for 7 years in order to earn Rachel, his daughter, as a wife. You see, Jacob showed up here pretty empty-handed. He didn't have any money or possessions with him, and so he didn't have anything with which to pay the dowry or the bride price for Rachel. All he could offer was his labor. And this idea, it seems good to Laban because he would rather Jacob be her husband than someone else. And so he agrees. And Jacob's desire and love for Rachel, it's so great that he worked for 7 years. 7 years of hard labor for her. Yet it says to Jacob, these 7 years seemed but just a few days. Ladies, how beautiful is that? He loved her so much that 7 years of hard labor seemed like just a few days. Rachel was Jacob's reward and his prize. And he had this deep and immense love for her. So this family agreement is in place, but as we continue, we see that the deceiver gets deceived. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife that I may go into her, for my time is completed." So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her servant. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, "What is this that you've done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" Laban said, "It is not done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me another 7 years." Jacob did so and completed her week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his female servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel to be her servant. So Jacob went into Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban for another 7 years. Having worked hard for 7 years, Jacob wants what is his. He's pretty forceful. He says, "Give me my wife, that I may go into her." On the surface, you may think that sounds like Jacob really just wants to kind of fulfill his carnal appetite, that he wants to have sex with her. But there is more to it than that. See, this marriage wouldn't be consummated. It wouldn't be official until he had consummated it. And so that's what he wants to do. He wants Rachel to be his wife fully. So the father of the bride, he gathers everyone together and he throws this big wedding feast to celebrate this whole occasion. As a matter of fact, these wedding feasts, they would be 7 days long, 7 days of eating and drinking. Well, in the evening, at night, presumably after Jacob had been drinking all day, Laban brought the older daughter Leah, the homely one, the ugly duckling. He brought her to Jacob, and it says that Jacob went into her. So the question that we might have is, why would Jacob do that? Well, we don't know for sure, but it was dark. It was evening, we're told. And he probably brought her to the tent. So he couldn't see that well. And the chances are Jacob had been drinking all day. But whatever the case, because of the consummation that occurred between Leah and Jacob, Leah is now officially Jacob's wife. There's no turning back. There's no giving her back to her father. And she even comes with a maidservant named Zilpah. So in the morning, Jacob, he realizes what has happened, and he confronts Laban. "Why then have you deceived me? Why have you done this to me?" And Laban, he justifies his deception by saying that the custom in this part of the world is never to marry off the younger daughter before you marry off the older daughter. And so since Leah was the oldest, she would have to be married before Rachel could be married. And so Laban tells Jacob, "Hey, finish the marriage week with Leah, finish these 7 days, and then I'll give you Rachel as a wife, and you'll work for another 7 years for her." Well, Jacob, he loves Rachel. He wants Rachel to be his wife, so he really has no choice. So he consummated his marriage with Rachel. And along with Rachel comes another maidservant named Bilhah. And Jacob works for another 7 years to pay for the price of Rachel, the only one that he really wanted. I mean, at the end of 14 years, think about this. At the end of 14 years, Jacob now has 4 women that are a part of his household. Yet it was Rachel, it was her that he loved. Though he had 2 wives, not to mention these 2 maidservants, he loved Rachel more than Leah. Do you see how Laban has bilked Jacob? He bilked him for not only 7 years of work, but for 14 years of work. Laban is just as much of a cheat and an opportunist as Jacob. The cheat has been cheated. The trickster has been tricked. The deceiver has been deceived. And I hear a couple people laughing out there. Why? Because we like to see this type of justice, I think. We like to see this type of justice where what goes around comes around. Jacob had weaseled his way into the birthright and the blessing. And now he's the one that's been duped. It's like the story I heard about a man that was on his way to a job interview and he was late. And so as he was rushing off of the subway, he pushed aside a lady who fell to the ground, and he didn't stop and help her up, and he didn't even apologize. He just kind of quickly looked back at her as he took off towards his interview. Well, he made the interview, and he was sitting in the conference room waiting for the interviewer, and wouldn't you know it, the lady walks through the door. She was the interviewer. I don't think he got that job. Thinking of this and thinking of things like this, turns like this, it puts a little bit of a smile on our face. Galatians 6:7 reads, "Do not be deceived, God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap." This verse, admittedly, is primarily talking about the eternal state, that the one who does fleshly things will reap corruption, but the one that does righteous and godly things will reap eternal life. However, this idea of reaping and sowing is all throughout Scripture. And I think there's a biblical principle here. Not always, but sometimes, what goes around comes around. And this is not karma, this is God. This is God. I said that Jacob has a lot of growing up to do, remember? And this whole incident that we read, it's going to impact him for the rest of his life. I believe that God is teaching Jacob here an important life lesson. And so we might want to pay attention to that lesson. In the whole grand scheme of Jacob's life, he has lived up to his name as the cheat, the supplanter, the deceiver. But now he's the one who's been deceived. Not only was God teaching him a lesson, but in fact, just as Jacob's deception in getting the birthright and the blessing only served to further God's plan, likewise, Laban's deception of Jacob only serves to further God's plan. This is God providentially working to bring about his purposes. Jacob's deception and then him being deceived have created one big, gigantic mess. We make a mess of things. But praise be to God that he brings order to our disorder. God works in our mess to bring about his purposes. Jacob now has 2 wives and 2 female servants. That is 3 more women than he actually wanted. That's a big mess. It's a big mess that Jacob's deception and Laban's deception have created. Yet, this is what I want you to see. This is exactly as God would have it. Because you see, these 4 women, Rachel and Leah, and their servants Zilpah and Bilhah, they will all give birth to sons through Jacob. A total of 12 sons will come from these 4 women. And those 12 sons and the people that come from them will be the nation of Israel. These 12 sons are the 12 tribes of Israel. God's plan being played out. God is weaving all of this together according to his will and his purpose. It is through this that the nation of Israel comes about, and it is through the nation of Israel that the Messiah, Jesus Christ, will come. It is Jesus who is the true offspring of Israel. It is him who is true Israel. He is the one through whom all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And so when you boil it all down in the grand scheme, as we flip over the tapestry and we see the beautiful picture and the amazing design on the front, in the big picture, from this deception, if you think about it, God brings about Jesus Christ, who is the Savior. How amazing is that? Through this mess comes salvation, reconciliation, and life. A Baptist preacher, he said, God's providence is all exercised through Christ. God is moving and working in the mess to bring about his purpose. And his purpose is Jesus. That Jesus would be both Lord and Savior. That Jesus would be King. That Jesus would have a bride who would bring him glory. What a wonderful thing it is, brothers and sisters, that we do not have to look out at the world and view the corruption and the chaos of the world as if something unexpected or insurmountable has happened. What a marvelous thing that even as we fumble through our days making a mess of everything, that God's will not be thwarted. He will not be dethroned. He will continually be weaving the threads of history toward his desired end. And he works even in the smallest of details. And so you know what that means? That means that nothing that happens to you is luck or coincidence or chance. Nothing. And some of those things are painful. And some of those things are marvelous. But we can take both of those and go, this is what God has for me. And it's upon him that I will lean all of my understanding. This may not make sense to me, but it makes sense to him. Amen. And so what I pray for us is that we would begin to see the working of God in the details of our lives. As you look back at this 2023, look and see how the Lord has worked. And I pray that in the details of our lives, having seen those, that above all we would see Jesus. Because he is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He is God's will and God's purpose. Blessed be his name. Let's pray.